Thank you to the Honorable Minister Dr. Jay Shankar, William Burns, and Rudra Chaudhary for this excellent discussion. Our next conversation is on the global governance of technology and the role of multilateral institutions therein. Within a fast changing international environment, what role can multilateral organizations play in the global governance of emerging technologies like AI and robotics, which are transformative but also pose risks concerning ethics, privacy, security, and sovereignty? To discuss this, we have on our next panel Fabrizio Hochschild-Drummond, Undersecretary General and Special Advisor for UN 75 United Nations, Nivruti Rai, Country Head Intel India and Vice President Data Center Group Intel Corporation. The discussion will be moderated by Michael Nelson, Director, Technology and International Affairs Program, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
Hi, I'm Michael Nelson. I'm the Director for Technology and International Affairs at the Carnegie Endowment in Washington, D.C. And I have the privilege today of leading a panel with two key players fostering international cooperation on the development of emerging technologies. These are the issues that will define the digital society that we're building and our digital future. And it requires thinking differently about how governments interact with each other. We're celebrating this year the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And in that time, the United Nations has fostered peace by bringing peacekeeping troops to countries around the world. But more importantly, it's been a place where countries exchange information on best practices for governance, for technology, for all the issues that we as citizens have to face. So today, I'm going to introduce our speakers. They'll provide some very brief opening comments on how we need to work together to build our digital future. And then we're going to go into a discussion between the two of them and our audience. So I encourage you to all post questions that we can respond to and make them tough, difficult questions. I know that Fabrizio Hochschild, one of our speakers, has been talking around the world on digital cooperation and the UN's role. And he has a lot of answers, but we also have to explore the new questions. He's answered a lot of the obvious questions, so I'm challenging you to come up with new questions, unusual questions that haven't been explored yet. So let me introduce our speakers. Fabrizio Hochschild is an Undersecretary General at the United Nations. He is the digital advisor to the Secretary General, Gutierrez, who has made digital cooperation and the development of information technologies, the internet, the cloud, big data, artificial intelligence, one of his top 3 priorities along with climate change and addressing the COVID crisis. In addition to working on digital cooperation, Mr. Hochschild is also in charge of the 75th anniversary celebration for the United Nations, which has been going on for about half a year now. Joining him is Navruti Rai. She is the head of Intel India. She's had a number of positions over the years with Intel, but it will take a long time to describe all that. So I invite you to look up her LinkedIn profile and to link to her there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hochschild for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Michael. And let me say what a pleasure it is to be here with you. And a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those who've joined. I think COVID has shown just how critical digital is to our age. For those of us who are connected, that connectivity has been quite literally a lifesaver. Without it, we couldn't have continued our jobs, our social lives, the education of our kids, often also access to healthcare. And of course, commerce, the economy, is increasingly digital across the world. But that highlights the great challenge of our time. Half of humanity, and that is the half of humanity that was already poorer before the digital age, that was already more excluded, is not connected. And with the advanced digitalization of the developed world and of the richer part of the developing world, the fact that half other people are not connected will mean that they're left ever further behind. There's no way we're going to be able to overcome the setbacks caused by COVID in the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda without addressing and gaining universal connectivity. But of course, connectivity needs to be not only present and affordable, it also needs to be safe and secure. And those are the other two very big challenges. Because as much as we've seen the benefits of connectivity, we've also seen the harms that it can wreak: cyber attacks, misinformation, the promotion of hate speech, the undermining of political cohesion. So we also need to learn to do much better in these areas. And all this requires steerage. All this requires, as all technologies, whether it's electricities, whether it's road systems, whether it's nuclear, it all requires policy setting by those entrusted with upholding the public good. And that has to happen at the national, at the regional, and the international level. And because these technologies have spread so fast, when it comes to digital, there tends to be a huge deficit, especially at the international level, inadequate policy setting. But the stark fact is that we will not be able to overcome the digital divide, nor will we be able to make connectivity safer and more secure unless we step up cooperation for governance at the international level to really work together between countries and companies and other stakeholders to maximize the benefits and curtail the harms, and to do our utmost to ensure that all people can be connected by 2030 affordably.
Thank you very much. Navruti, what are the opportunities here?
Sure.
What can digital cooperation lead to?
Absolutely, I will talk about it. But first of all, thank you very, very much, Mike, for inviting me. And I'm completely honored and humbled to be part of this, such an esteemed panelist like Fabrizio. And I loved hearing him. The topic that we are going to be talking about is not just very critical, but is extremely time sensitive. When the countries need to come together, we all experienced this pandemic, which Fabrizio just talked about, how we had to come together to understand this issue, to come up with vaccines. We're still trying to work together. So the need of the hour is when the technologies are changing exponentially, when the society and the social structure is changing, There's tremendous amount of shift in the geopolitics. What better time to come together and look at what we need to do and solve the nation's problem, solve the world problem by coming together. We have to look both at the macro and the micro level to make sure that us as countries, us as companies see value in coming together. Us as multiple nations see value in coming together. We as industry, we as government, we as academia, we have to join our voices and come and solve the problem that the world is facing. Globally, what we see, there's an increasing trend towards these nationalistic sentiments. And we've seen all the more, in the large democracies, how these kind of nationalistic sentiments are changing the nature and aspirations of the society. How each country is building aspirations which also, is driven through these nationalistic sentiments. Now, we talked about, how the world needs to come together, the large problems that we are facing. We're seeing these nationalistic sentiments. We know that some of the frameworks that we have at the global level seem to be failing us. International multilateral institutions are struggling more in the faces of some of the challenges that I talked about. So we do have to look at few, critical factors like the macroeconomics. Are they advantageous, for the international cooperation? Look at the microeconomics, how the new models that we are looking at is beneficial for the countries, companies, and look at the strategic interests of a nation. Fabrizio talked about these divides. There are economics divides, there are technology adoption divides, there are divides when you're looking at, the IPs, the patents, etc. So there are tremendous amount of divides, and we have to look at national level interest and security. Looking at all four of these things, it reminded me that the basis of United Nations was peace and security. And I really feel we need to look at peace and security with the lens of what today is. I talked about, how technology has changed, how the society has changed, how the politics has changed. So we need to look at peace and security in a different way. We need to look at, ground rules for frameworks, best practices that we have today, starting from Bretton Woods to the World Trade Organization, which is all built for the world good. We were able to address priorities and create a common denominator across the many countries. That's the need of the hour. Now, with the new world order and the new technologies and the new economies that are emerging, we need to focus on technologies like AI, quantum, 5G. And these are the technologies which will form the backbone. But these technologies are not going to be developed independently by a single nation. We need to revisit the fundamentals that I've called above and look at, macro, micro, security and national interest, and then come together. I'll give you one example of data. There are concerns on security. There are concerns on losing out monetization to other countries. There are talks about privacy, localization, ethics, all what you can think of. All of this challenges that I just talked about is making the conversation really constrained and very boxed and limit us from realizing what technology can drive for the mankind. We don't want to be looking at the small gains and miss out on the big picture and miss out on the big value that we can create. Drive a way where we can fully leverage the power of data and create it in a manner which is more equitable, which helps us dissolve some of these divides that we talked about, create value for the users, let the innovators build upon the data that we have. So there is a need for the global, multilateral approach in building a framework that can drive such kind of, value add. And we all have to partner, whether we are in us industries, whether we are government, whether we are academia, we need to come together and build this. I'll just give you a small example. For 5G, there's an organization that drives, standards, the 3GPP. Now, you'd say 5G was a little bit different because it was an evolution, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Now, things like AI, things like quantum are brand new, and they will change the way we look at businesses, where we look at, value creation. Yes, it is. It is going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. That's all the more reason for us to come together. Einstein would often say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. Reality is we are not in Stone Age, we are not in the medieval age, we are not in the modern age, we are in the ultra modern age where we need to look at doing things differently. We need to build infrastructures and frameworks that will enable all of us to create value, to drive innovation, invention for the world. So we should not look at competing in a manner where each one of us is driving to own a slice of a pie, but build a larger pie across the world where multiple nations and the world and the people could benefit. So I am optimistic. I loved hearing Fabrizio. I am excited about the question, but I am urging that there is time to look at the UN 2.0 or the WTO 2.0 or create a World Data Organization 2.0. So that's the need, and that's my urge, and that's my one-liner, Mike, that I want to see a UN 2.0 driving peace and security in a manner that addresses the need of this ultra-modern world, which has disruption of technology, confluence coming as we speak. Thank you.
Fabrizio, do you want to pick up on that? Talking about a global data organization?
I think what I would fully agree with everything that's been said, but I think what's highlighted is we're moving into a new world, a digital world, an AI world, and the technology is moving much faster and spreading much, let alone to guide it. And I think we have some urgent catching up to do, both in terms of our understanding and then, of course, setting the policies that will really maximize the benefits and curtail the harms. And know what these technologies, by definition, cross borders. So no one, as important as the national level initiatives are, they're a key building block. They're not alone. We need more international cooperation. I think the peace and security field that Niruti alluded to is a key exemplifier of that. I mean, the wars changed after thousands of years of being fought in a very similar manner when air transport was introduced, when you could have attacks from the air. That happened, around 100. It happened significantly with the First World War. That changed the face of warfare. Now, arguably, wars are won and lost largely by the capacities of countries, their air forces. Now, for the first time since the invention of air warfare, we have a whole new domain for strife, for conflict, and that is cyber. And that's a massive domain at the international level, at the national level, within communities. And we still don't have adequate safeguards how to keep us safe. And we see that in interference and manipulation of elections with AI tools, as wonderful as AI has been on the plus side, the famous Cambridge Analytica story. We see that in cyber attacks that have now become a daily reality. So we really need to come to better grips with what we've put out there and find better ways to steer it. And I think we have to understand and recognize both the potential for harm and maximize the potential for good. I mean, there are discussions, very slow discussions going on around lethal autonomous weapons. I don't think any one of us wants to see weapons that can kill on a mass scale with no human agent behind them. But the technology is already there. The only thing that can stop it now is international agreements. I do think we all want to see the amplification of AI, for example, against the backdrop of pandemics, to maximize the possibility of identifying the best treatments and the best prevention mechanisms, being able to track the spread of viruses to keep the maximum number of people safe. That we want to see. So we need much better guidance for areas like AI. And it's not just legislation, it can be soft law, and it's also a code of conduct. If you think when the great surge of research in biochemistry at the beginning of the last century was accompanied by a very healthy process where certain types of research were stigmatized as bad and other types of research were stigmatized as good. So scientists involved in looking for cancer cures got lots of plaudits from their fellow scientists. Those who were looking to invent a new pathogen that would cause mass death were stigmatized, and that sort of stigma helped in the biology, in the chemistry field, steer benefits. In AI, we're not yet seeing the same. We're seeing a fairly opportunistic approach towards research. So what we need is at multiple levels of maximizing the potential for good and curtailing the harms, and not continuing in this pretense that technology is simply neutral. The technologies we've invented can spread harm on an unprecedented scale. So we need to step up to the challenge and do better steerage, and that needs to happen internationally.
So let's get back to the question of data, because this is an area that the UN and other organizations have done a lot in when it comes to scientific data. I'm involved with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and we work with our counterparts around the world to foster sharing of research data. But of course, that's about 0.1% of the data that's being generated every year, and the amount of data doubles every 2 years. This is the big opportunity, but right now, there's not a lot of trust. There's not trust in some of the data, and there's certainly not trust between companies and, more importantly, between countries. So we've gone from a world where the technologists were designing this global platform to a world where politicians are inserting all sorts of geopolitical concerns. And we're now blocking applications in some countries because one government doesn't like another government. And the fact that there isn't a level of trust and that level of trust is declining is going to make it much harder to build the kind of global platforms that could allow for sharing of data. And this is an area we're focusing on a lot at Carnegie. We're talking to different groups who are talking about the need for a new data consortium where companies would come together and establish codes of conduct for sharing data, and also work with governments to eliminate some of the barriers to that kind of sharing. Another group I'm involved in is talking about the Bretton Woods Agreement for data. It's as important as money. It's more important than money. So let's think about what it would look like to unleash the power of this data, and yet do it in a way that doesn't lead to new security concerns or new privacy concerns. And the last thing I would point to is the work of MIT and Sandy Pentland, who's written a new book called Building the New Economy, all about how we can build data structures with thousands or tens of thousands of data unions around the world, providing for this kind of sharing of data in an accountable, trusted way. So let me come back again to Navrudi's idea here. How do we foster this global environment for sharing of data, and what are the biggest barriers to that right now?
So I'm assuming, Mike, you're asking me.
Well, both of you.
Okay.
But
so
you're first.
I'll go first. Okay. So firstly, data is very, very valuable. And I did talk about that the biggest problem with data is the worry everybody has of security, privacy, and very importantly, losing out on the monetization. However, I must say, if you start mining diamonds and you don't polish the diamond, they are like rocks, and nobody gets the value of it. That's what's going to be data, like a rock. If we share the data, if we are able to polish the data, we will be able to create more value for the world and then be able to leverage that value for humanity. Now, I do understand that the challenge is in the monetization and challenges in who gets the money. The innovation and invention needs to be driven globally. And I tell you, I have been in Intel for a very long time, and half my Intel career was a technologist, half my Intel career as a manager. And I assure you, Mike and Fabrizio, if we tell our scientists ways of sharing data, value, without actually sharing data, I assure you we have ways we can share data without actually moving them or without actually sharing pieces of it. We have already been looking at, me and my team are looking at the federated platform for learning. So there are ways to overcome these challenges. But the need of the hour is, again, I'm going to say, I am working in insanity if I continue to do the same things, because in all times, policy followed technology. Technology, development, innovation, invention happened first, policy happened later. But the eye-opening realization for me is these times with technology like quantum, technologies like AI, etc., we need to build policy framework before the technology adoption. That's where the minds of the world of many, many countries need to come together. And I find UN umbrella so beautiful because I love the basis with which UN was formed. Many countries need to come together and build that framework of the ability to share data so value can be created. We can polish that rock and then create the diamond which could be shared based on where the data is coming from, where the data value is, who is driving the polishing. There can be many ways created. But firstly, we have to build policies. We have to build regulations, come together as a world organization, like I said, World UN 2.0 or something. You can name, any which way. But the world organization needs to come together and build this framework, define the policies, then look at, leveraging the data and make the diamond.
Before turning to Fabrizio, I wanted to say that we've had some problems because of the glitch with Google this morning. That means we're not able to collect questions the way we had hoped. So I would ask people who have questions to post them on Twitter using the hashtag Global Tech Summit. And if you have answers, you can post those there too, or just observations. So let's continue the dialogue on Twitter. Just to build one thing on what you said, and before turning to Fabrizio, data isn't a commodity like diamonds because we can share it. Vint Cerf is famous for saying, information is power, but information sharing is much more powerful. Because we can take the data and make 1,000 copies and give it to 1,000 people. And that's what's new and different. And so that's an idea that all of us understand, but policymakers need to understand more so that they can help building these platforms. Fabrizio, what do we do to get past the barriers to data sharing and help policymakers understand the new opportunities?
Well, I think you're very right to focus on this area, because data will drive economies, will drive our welfare. It already is in many ways. Data is the fuel of AI. AI is going to be the cross-cutting technology of the future, and arguably that's already happening now. I think one has to break this up a little and look at it from many, there are many different levels to this, some of which are easier to grapple with than others. There are simple standard issues about, how can you actually make, say, health data collected in one place compatible and comparable to data, health data compared in another place. And that those are standards issues. And I must say the internet community has been pretty good at coming to terms with those and resolving those through technical bodies. But then there are issues where different regions, different countries have very different attitudes, and there it's more difficult to reconcile standards, privacy. To what extent do we own our data? What is the rightful level of intrusion of a state into our data, or companies for that matter? What sort of free rein can either private companies or states have on our data? And there are very differing attitudes between East and West. Even between Europe and North America, there are very different attitudes. And then there's the issue of data integrity. I mean, this is getting more and more focused. That data data used in sentencing can actually make judges more objective in their sentencing, because it's less influenced by their mood of the day, by whether their football team won over the weekend, or by what they had for lunch. All of which studies have shown can influence the length of a sentence that a criminal gets. So AI applications with data there can help. But data can also reinforce biases. And we've seen that. I mean, there are many studies that show data used in human resources can replicate and amplify prejudicial hiring. So there's, how do you show the integrity of the data so that it's really doing a good job? And then there's the issue of access, because, data works where it happens on an enormous scale. The data of 5 people is pretty useless. If it's 5 million people, you begin to get interesting findings. And AI self-learning tools, machine learning tools, require a maximum amount of data. Well, that data, even if it's a transferable resource, is in the hands of very few platforms, mostly in just 2 countries in the world. So that has all sorts of political implications. The part of the world that would most benefit from better AI applications, most benefit from better use of data, are not usually at the table. And I'm thinking of the global south. And then there are also tax issues, which were alluded to. So I think all these need to be studied, and we need to look. Now we're locked, especially in the AI field and by implication in the data field, we're locked in an international rivalry between 2 superpowers, where the logic of rivalry and confrontation is much stronger than the logic of cooperation. And that rivalry is sort of overshadowing everything else. And I think we need to take a step back. We're not going to get rid of rivalry, but understand where can we work together, where is there common ground, and where will we agree to disagree. Now all the logic is focused on where we disagree, and very little political effort, diplomatic effort, research effort is on where we can agree. And I think there are many areas. We all agree that data should not be used to better connect those who wish to do harm and abuse children with those who like to profit from such things. Well, in fact, it's happening on a massive scale. It's spread faster than the internet because of a deficit in international cooperation. So let's get our act together on those areas where we can agree. And I think but that has to happen from the bottom up. A number of countries, China, have proposed a global initiative around data. But if it's China alone, with the best will in the world, it's not going to go very far. It has to be. I think we also need the academic community, the civil society community, to come together and say we want this and demand this from their governments. Otherwise, we're going to see very unequal access to data that will benefit, and we won't be able to make the most of the great technologies that are out there, nor to be able to curtail the harms that they can also bring.
I'm so glad that you mentioned all the different facets of trust, because often when we have a discussion about whether to trust an application or whether a particular new technology or an algorithm is accountable, we just focus on the privacy issues and maybe the security issues. But we need to make sure that that data is accurate, it's representative of the whole world and the whole community of people using the internet. And I think very importantly, we have to focus on the reliability. We are down to the last few minutes here. So I wanted to challenge you to give us a summary in just a couple sentences. You know, what is the headline that you want us to remember from this discussion? And I would also ask you to give us an example of global cooperation that's really worked. Not necessarily in this area. Maybe there's a model from another area where you look and you say, countries got together, they empowered their citizens to do new things in a new way. So those are the two challenges for you. And I would leave with my tweet, which is, data is not the new oil, it's not the new plutonium. I heard the other day it's the new avocado, meaning that it's delicious and useful, but has a short shelf life. I don't think we need to talk about that. We need to talk about how trust is the new oil. Trust is something very hard to get, and it's very easy to burn up. And that's what I hope we can do through digital cooperation. So Nevrudi, do you have an example of digital cooperation that has really worked in the corporate sector or in the government sector? And what is your final punchline? Okay,
so I actually gave away my one effort that worked was 3GPP. If you look at 5G, there were countries who are coming up with their own different solutions, spectrum suggestions, technologies to enable 5G. But 3GPP was able to drive standardization, and it is challenging, but it is possible. So that's my example. And my one-liner is, I want technology is the cheapest way to create value for the people. So I want technology for the people first. And I want the world to come together. We have seen the pandemic, and we know if we come together, I've seen it in my company, Intel. If we all come together, we are able to fix any damn thing, that we face. So I believe the pandemic has taught us it's time we come together and use technology for people first, value for the people, and that's what technology and data should do. Data to me is meaningless unless it is made into a valuable substance. So I would think data is like a proton or a neutron. Unless you make a molecule out of it, unless that molecule becomes H2O or sodium chloride, it's useless. So I want to leverage data for people first and make the cheapest way, which is technology, to improve the lives of the people.
Fabrizio?
Yeah, I would say that if one wants to look at global cooperation steering things for good, I think an exceptional example, which we don't even think about because we take it so much for granted, but it allowed us to grow up in safety with progress, or most of us, in ways that could have fallen out very differently without global cooperation, is nuclear technologies. Mm-hmm. In fact, the very first resolution of the General Assembly was on the peaceful use of nuclear technologies. And that was at a time of unprecedented superpower rivalry. And had states not agreed to come together and set standards where they could agree, put safeguards in place where they could agree, control weapons systems where they could agree, while disagreeing completely on their political systems, well, probably not many of us would be alive today. So there are outstanding examples. Of course, the same methodology won't work with the digital sphere, but it does show that you can rivalry and friction should not prevent you. On the contrary, it makes it more urgent to come together and identify common interests, common ground, which is securing a better future for all. And that objective that underlines our charter surely is still there. And in terms of my one tweet, I mean, it's probably more than 100 characters, but so it would need a bit of refining. But, you know, digital technologies had this huge promise of democratization of knowledge, of promotion of international connection and understanding. And we are going to be the generation that either betrays or fulfills that promise. But to fulfill that promise, no country, no company, no civil society group can act alone. It will take greater cooperation across all sectors to make sure digital technologies fulfill the promise that they held at the beginning and that they still hold today.
Okay, so my final tweet, and we have to wrap up, is thank you very much, in capital letters, hashtag Global Tech Summit, hashtag teamwork. Thank you very much. Wonderful session.
Thank you.